The morning air inside the airport terminal was crisp and cool, humming with the usual rhythm of rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and distant coffee orders. Yet amid the everyday rush, a moment was about to unfold that would pierce through the ordinary. Her name was Simone Carter. Composed, dignified, and always a step ahead, she walked into the priority check-in area wearing a soft cream coat that flowed behind her like a quiet statement of presence. A silk scarf wrapped delicately around her neck, and a slender leather passport holder rested confidently in her hand. She wasn't there to impress, she was there because she belonged. But belonging, she would soon be reminded, was not always recognized by those who refused to see. The priority check-in sign shimmered under the fluorescent lights, a promise of efficiency and respect. Simone had paid for that promise, earned it in fact through long hours, sleepless nights, and a reputation carved from integrity. Yet as she stepped forward in line, her first-class ticket ready, she caught the eye of the man at the counter, Carter Miller. Young, pressed uniform, and oozing the smugness of someone clinging to what little power he thought he had. His gaze flicked to her, and there it was, the pause. Barely a second, but charged with presumption. "Excuse me," Simone said warmly, offering her passport and boarding pass. Her tone was calm, the way it always was when she was prepared to be underestimated. Carter took the documents with forced politeness, but then frowned as he glanced over the ticket. "Ma'am, this line is for priority check-in only," he said, his voice slowing deliberately, as if explaining a complex rule to a child. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The air stilled around them. Simone's jaw remained relaxed, though a flicker of something passed behind her eyes. Weariness, maybe. Not of travel, but of this moment. One she had endured in 100 variations across boardrooms, hotels, and yes, airports. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she replied evenly. "You are welcome to scan the ticket again." He did, muttering under his breath, his fingers jabbing at the keyboard with mounting aggression. A line began forming behind her row. Simone could feel their eyes, the soft murmurs. She imagined what they saw, a black woman alone, standing firm in a space some believed wasn't built for her. After several minutes of performative clicking, Carter looked up again, expression tightened. "This ticket doesn't appear valid. I'll need to verify it with a supervisor." "Do you have proof of purchase?" Simone's breath caught just for a moment, but she didn't let it show. Proof of purchase? The question wasn't about policy. It was about disbelief, about assumption, about a refusal to imagine that a woman who looked like her could simply belong in this space. She took a slow breath and leaned in, her voice a low melody of steel. "I suggest," she said carefully, "you be absolutely certain how you proceed from this moment forward." Carter, emboldened by the uniform stitched to his chest, offered a smug shrug and gestured for airport security. The nearby guard approached, and the space thickened with tension. Simone stood her ground, her fingers curling just slightly around the leather handle of her suitcase. She wasn't going to raise her voice. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. She dialed one number. It rang once. "It's me," she said calmly. "I'm at the airport. Tell the team to get ready. We're making a change." She ended the call and looked up. For the first time, Carter's arrogance wavered. Something behind her stillness had shifted. It was subtle, like a pressure drop before a storm, but he didn't yet know he was standing in the eye of it. The terminal had gone quieter, the crowd watching with an uncomfortable mixture of curiosity and unease. The very air seemed to lean in. The security guard hesitated. He sensed the misstep, the imbalance in how things had played out. But Carter? He crossed his arms, as if still convinced of his righteousness. "Like I said," he muttered, "just following protocol." Simone said nothing. She stood, a woman forged in the fires of exclusion, who had learned long ago the power of restraint. Her silence was not weakness, it was strategy. It didn't take long before the assistant director of airport operations arrived, eyes wide with confusion, then recognition. "Ms. Carter," he stammered, glancing from Simone to the guard and back to Carter, whose face had gone pale. "Everything all right?" the director asked, voice brittle. "That depends," Simone replied, her tone measured. "Is this how your staff is trained to handle first-class passengers? Or just the ones who look like me?" The question hung in the air like thunder before a downpour. The director fumbled, apologizing hastily, trying to usher her away, but Simone didn't move. Her phone buzzed again, confirmation that her team was already preparing the press release. She now owned a controlling interest in the airline, a strategic move finalized quietly over the past month. With a nod, she turned back to Carter. "You won't be checking in another passenger today," she said, "and I suggest you collect your things." The hush deepened. Somewhere someone gasped. But Simone didn't pause for dramatics. She simply retrieved her documents and walked toward the executive lounge. Each step the echo of power reclaimed. She wasn't just checking in for a flight that morning. She was checking into history. If you felt Simone's strength, if her story struck a chord, show your support. Drop a comment, share the story, and subscribe for more true tales of justice, resilience, and transformation. Let her remind us, quiet strength doesn't whisper, it reverberates. The buzz of the terminal seemed to dim the moment Danielle James stepped into the priority check-in line, heels clicking against polished tile, her dark blue coat flowing behind her like a flag of quiet resolve. She wasn't flashy, didn't need to be. Her presence was unmistakable, confident, poised, grounded in a stillness that commanded respect. But today she would not be greeted with the dignity her demeanor deserved. Today, a small act of disrespect would collide with a power far greater than anyone in that terminal could comprehend. And as the story unfolded, it would leave behind a lesson many would never forget. Never mistake calm for weakness. She stepped forward, offering her passport and first-class ticket to the man behind the counter. His name tag read Carter Miller. He didn't look up right away. When he did, his eyes flicked to her face with the barest flicker of surprise, then narrowed with a skepticism so familiar it barely stung. But Danielle noticed. She always noticed. "This is the priority line," Carter said slowly, as if explaining the obvious to someone unfamiliar with basic travel. "You're sure you're in the right place?" Her smile was small, patient. "Yes, I'm sure." He took the ticket and passport, frowning as he typed into his terminal, eyebrows knitting together with theatrical concern. The performance had begun, and the audience around them, fellow travelers, distracted staff, passers-by, watched with growing curiosity. Danielle said nothing, her face unreadable. Carter muttered. "There seems to be an issue with this ticket." She waited, calm as ever. No tapping fingers, no sighs, just stillness. "I'm going to need to verify this," he continued, glancing behind her at the growing line, as if her presence was now a burden. "This kind of thing happens sometimes. This kind of thing." Danielle heard the implication in the pause, in the glance, in the smirk barely tugging at his lips. "Of course," she said quietly. Her voice didn't rise, but there was a firmness in it, like stone beneath silk. Carter walked away, ticket in hand, muttering to a nearby colleague. They laughed, just loud enough for her to hear, but not loud enough to be held accountable. Around her, murmurs began to spread. The woman in front of her had checked in without issue. The man behind her was called up without a second glance. Yet here she stood, ignored, dismissed, delayed. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. But today, Danielle wasn't just another passenger. She was the storm behind the clouds. And they didn't see it coming. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. A quick swipe unlocked it, and she pressed a single number. One saved under the name Priority Ops Global. The line rang once. "It's Danielle," she said evenly. "We've got a situation. Initiate." That was all. One sentence. No raised voice, no dramatics, just truth. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse. Around her, people were watching now, some curious, others amused, some uncomfortable. But Danielle stood tall, her hands folded neatly in front of her, unmoved. 10 minutes passed before Carter returned. This time his confidence was thinner, stretched over confusion like a poorly fitted suit. "Yeah, I still can't find the reservation." "Are you sure this wasn't a mistake?" he asked, now trying to shift the blame back to her. "It might be better if you step aside so we can help the next person." Danielle tilted her head ever so slightly. "You'll want to wait." "For what?" Before she could answer, a commotion behind the check-in desk interrupted. Two men in suits and a woman in business attire rushed down the hallway with urgency in their steps. The woman, tall and composed, came straight to Danielle. "Miss James," she said breathlessly, "apologies for the delay. We're handling it now." Carter blinked. "Wait, you know her?" The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. She's the reason we're standing here. Miss James holds controlling interest in the airline as of this week. The color drained from Carter's face. Danielle said nothing. The woman turned to Carter, her tone now clipped. You will step away from the desk immediately. But I didn't. You did. And there are cameras. Step away. He obeyed, retreating from the counter with the stunned disbelief of someone whose reality had shifted in an instant. A supervisor took his place, eyes averted. Danielle finally spoke. Is Mr. Blake, the regional director, available? Yes, ma'am, the woman said. He's on his way down now. The crowd was quiet. People were watching with wide eyes, processing the shift in power, trying to reconcile the woman they'd seen being dismissed with the executive now commanding the entire terminal. When Blake arrived, flustered and apologetic, Danielle didn't scold or demand. She didn't need to. Her calm was louder than any outburst could have been. I expect a report on Carter Miller's past incidents and performance reviews by end of day, she said. And I want to speak with your HR lead before boarding. Absolutely, Miss James, Blake said, nodding fervently. Danielle simply stepped forward and placed her boarding pass on the scanner. The green light flashed. She picked up her bag and walked toward the gate, her quiet power radiating through the stunned silence behind her. No shouting, no scene, just results. To everyone watching, remember this. Real power doesn't always announce itself with volume. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it only needs a single phone call. If you felt Danielle's strength today, let us know in the comments. Hit like to stand with her and subscribe for more stories of calm justice and unshakable dignity. Because the world needs more of that power, quiet, steady, and unstoppable. She didn't ask for attention when she arrived. Danielle Preston moved through the airport like a breeze, calm, composed, understated, but undeniably present. The soft click of her low heels echoed off polished tile as she pulled her black roller bag behind her. Silk scarf tucked neatly into a smart navy coat. There was a gentle dignity about her, the kind you couldn't fake, the kind born from years of quiet perseverance. She had an early morning flight to make and a day of meetings ahead. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing dramatic. And yet, within the hour, she'd find herself at the center of a storm, one she hadn't started, but one she would most certainly finish. Danielle stepped into the priority check-in line, her eyes briefly flicking to the polished silver sign above the roped-off section. First class and priority. She belonged there. Her ticket was clear. But in a world that too often read her skin before her status, belonging wasn't always enough. The man at the counter, Carter Miller, looked up from his terminal as she approached. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Something cold flickered there. He looked her over once, then again. This line's for priority check-in, he said slowly, as if explaining it to someone unfamiliar with travel. You're sure you're in the right place? Danielle's smile was soft but steady. Yes, I am. He took her boarding pass and ID, fingers drumming impatiently as he scanned the screen. Weird. I'm not seeing your ticket in the system, he muttered. You might need to step aside while we verify a few things. There it was, the shift, the suspicion, the assumption. She had seen it 100 different ways in 100 different places, and it never stung less. But Danielle was no stranger to grace under pressure. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't snap. She simply nodded and stepped aside, her expression unreadable. Carter whispered to another agent, smirking. A few travelers nearby began to murmur. Some offered her subtle glances. Pity, curiosity, judgment. It all melted together into a kind of quiet humiliation that filled the air like fog. She checked her phone. 6:07 a.m. Her flight would board in 25 minutes. Still no movement. Still no verification. Then the insult came. The supervisor on duty, Greg Bradley, approached with a strained smile. Ma'am, he said, I understand there's a discrepancy with your ticket. We've contacted the airline to confirm your purchase. But in the meantime, we're going to need you to wait outside the priority area so we can process the rest of our travelers. Danielle blinked. Wait outside? Bradley nodded. Just standard procedure. Shouldn't take long. A line had been crossed. It wasn't about a delay anymore. It was about being removed, separated, made other. Her cheeks warmed, not from embarrassment, but from the sheer gall of it all. She took a slow breath. Let me make a call. She stepped to the side, lifting her phone to her ear. Good morning, she said, her voice calm and clipped. We've got a problem. I'm at the airport now. Send in the team. I want Bradley and Miller both flagged for immediate review. She hung up. 5 minutes later, everything shifted. From across the terminal, two sharply dressed men appeared, one tall with a silver tie, the other carrying a leather folio. Their pace was urgent, their eyes scanning until they landed on her. And then the atmosphere changed. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. Recognition, then panic. Miss Preston, the taller man said, breathless. I'm so sorry, we were just briefed. Please, come with us. Carter squinted. Wait, Miss Preston, you know her? The other man, whose badge read VP Operations, turned to Carter. You should know her too. As of yesterday, she owns this airline. Silence. Absolute breathtaking silence. Greg Bradley froze. His expression crumbled. Carter took a half step back, mouth open but silent. Danielle said nothing. She simply followed the executives, pausing only once, to look Carter in the eyes. Not with anger, but with something colder. Final. They led her to the VIP lounge, apologizing profusely, offering water, coffee, anything to soften the blow. But she didn't want comfort. She wanted change. As she settled into a sleek leather chair, her phone buzzed again. A text from her assistant. You need to know, Carter was written up twice last year for inappropriate comments to black female passengers. Both were dismissed by Greg Bradley. Danielle stared at the screen. That was the final piece. I want Bradley and Carter terminated by end of day, she said quietly to the VP, and I want a full audit of priority check-in teams across all hubs within the next 2 weeks. Understood. Her voice didn't rise, she didn't scream, but her silence spoke volumes, and the ripples of her decision would shake the entire company. Before she boarded, a young woman who'd been in line earlier approached quietly. I saw what happened, she said. I wanted to say thank you for not letting them get away with it. Danielle smiled. It's not just about me, she said. It never is. And that's what you should remember too. When you see someone treated as if they don't belong, even when they do, speak up. Hold the line, because sometimes the quietest person in the room turns out to be the most powerful one of all. If Danielle's story moved you, show her some love in the comments. Hit like to support the message. And subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, dignity, and justice. The moment Danielle Preston was told to step aside from the priority check-in line, something inside her stilled. Not broke, stilled, like the air just before a storm rolls in. She had handed over her documents calmly, just as she'd done 100 times before. But this time the response wasn't routine. The man at the counter, Carter, looked at her boarding pass, then at her, and with a smirk playing at the corner of his lips said, I think you might be in the wrong place. His voice was low and smug, drenched in the kind of condescension that was more piercing than a shout. Danielle said nothing at first. She just watched him, watched the performance of someone playing gatekeeper to a door she'd long since built the keys for. This is priority check-in, he added unnecessarily. It's for premium customers. He said it like she didn't know. Like the carefully curated outfit she wore, a wool navy trench coat, leather tote, modest heels, wasn't evidence enough that she belonged. Like the platinum-level boarding pass she'd offered wasn't clear. The line behind her shifted awkwardly as onlookers glanced up, pretending not to watch, while doing exactly that. Danielle tilted her head and gave Carter a look that had silenced boardrooms. Yes, she said evenly, this is priority. That's what I purchased. Check again. But he didn't. Instead, he flagged down Greg Bradley, the operations manager. Greg approached with that same wary expression people wear when they think a problem is about to start and believe it's your fault before they've even heard your voice. Is there an issue? He asked, glancing only briefly at Danielle before turning to Carter. She's claiming priority check-in, Carter said with exaggerated politeness. But the system's not recognizing her ticket. I'm just trying to make sure she's not trying to game it. Danielle's heart didn't race. She didn't stammer. Instead, she pulled out her phone with a deliberate calm and made one call. One sentence, it's happening, send them in. The air seemed to change. The stillness shifted to pressure. Bradley, clearly trying to de-escalate, forced a tight-lipped smile. Ma'am, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, he said. If you could step to the dial, we'll sort it out. But she didn't move. Let me ask you something, Mr. Bradley Way, she said, her voice soft but unwavering. Is this the standard of service you train your team to deliver? Public humiliation, false assumptions, baseless accusations? Carter let out a low scoff. You're overreacting, he muttered, barely under his breath. Danielle's eyes snapped to his, holding his gaze like a scalpel. Careful, she warned. And that's when they arrived. Two sharply dressed men in dark suits flanking a third, a woman with a tablet in hand and urgency in her step. They moved through the terminal like current, parting crowds without saying a word. They approached Danielle with deference. Miss Preston, one of them said, our apologies for the delay. We're here to handle this. Carter blinked. Wait, you know her? The man turned, badge visible on his chest. Senior Vice President of Customer Affairs. We do, and you should have. Greg Bradley paled. Danielle didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Instead, she looked squarely at both men and said, I gave you every opportunity to correct your mistake. You chose to double down. The SVP gestured to one of the accompanying staff. Escort Mr. Carter off the premises immediately. His employment is terminated effective now. Carter opened his mouth as if to protest, but no sound came. His face crumpled in real time, confusion, disbelief, and a sudden hollow understanding of what had just happened. Bradley took a step forward, his voice thin. Let's not be hasty. Surely there's a review process. There is, the SVP said sharply, and you're about to be in it. Danielle turned to Greg, her expression not cruel, but heavy with disappointment. You had a choice. When Carter's behavior escalated, you could have stepped in, de-escalated, asked a single respectful question. But you didn't. You assumed he was. He was right. You defaulted to suspicion. I didn't mean, he began. But you did, she cut in, because not acting is still a decision. One you've made before, I imagine, but not this time. Not with me. The crowd that had formed was quiet now, wide-eyed. Not just because of the spectacle, but because they knew, on some level, they were witnessing something long overdue. The consequences rarely arrived this swiftly, this publicly. But today, they had. Danielle gathered her boarding pass and ID, slipped them back into her bag, and nodded to the SVP. Thank you, she said, but this doesn't end with firing one man. You need to audit your entire priority experience. If this is happening to me, it's happening to others. She turned, ready to walk toward her gate, but she paused, looked back at Bradley one last time and said, let this be the last time your silence is confused for neutrality. She didn't look back again, and she didn't need to, because the tone had been set, not just for that team, but for the entire airline. Her grace had met their prejudice in one. Let Danielle's story be a reminder. Quiet strength does not mean passive acceptance. Sometimes dignity wields the sharpest blade. If her courage moved you, comment below to show your support. Hit like to spread the message, and subscribe for more real stories of power, justice, and resilience. Danielle Robinson didn't want apologies. She didn't want flowers. She didn't want someone in a pressed suit to say, we're sorry for the inconvenience. What she wanted, what she demanded, was change. Real, structural, undeniable change. After the humiliation she endured at the airport, being publicly questioned, disrespected, and treated like a fraud at the priority check-in counter, Danielle didn't just walk away angry, she walked away activated. Because while most people would have taken the incident, swallowed their pride, and boarded the flight in silence, Danielle was not most people. She didn't just own a first-class ticket, she had controlling interest in the airline. And that meant she had the power to change everything. The moment she stepped into her suite at the hotel later that night, she took off her coat, pulled her laptop from her bag, and got to work, not on emails, not on business deals, but on a reform initiative that would shake the very core of the company she now owned. She didn't want a performance of accountability. She wanted the receipts. So she called her assistant and requested full personnel files for every employee at that terminal, especially the priority check-in staff. She wanted disciplinary records, internal complaints, passenger reviews, and leadership evaluations from the last 5 years. As the documents began flooding her inbox, Danielle sat silently, her face calm, her eyes sharp. What she found wasn't just disappointing, it was infuriating. The man who had embarrassed her, Carter, had a record. Not criminal, not violent, but a pattern of behavior that had told a story. Rudeness to certain passengers, complaints ignored, moments dismissed by managers as isolated incidents. But nothing about what happened to Danielle was isolated. It was the inevitable result of a culture that made it easy for people like Carter to thrive and for leadership to look the other way. Danielle didn't sleep that night. She read every report, every line, every complaint that had been quietly filed away. Some from Black women who, like her, had been questioned, dismissed, even threatened with removal for simply existing in first class or standing in the wrong line. Most were polite, some were tearful. One ended with, "It made me feel like I didn't belong, like I was trespassing in a place I paid to be in." That sentence stayed with her. It echoed inside her like thunder. She knew she couldn't let this go, so she did what she did best. She strategized. Danielle drafted a three-phase plan titled Structural Accountability and Cultural Integrity. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't something meant to win PR points. It was real, it was raw, and it was meant to last. The first phase was immediate. All employees with repeated customer complaints tied to bias or disrespect would be placed under review. No exceptions. Phase 2 required leadership retraining. Not the kind where you click through a 15-minute PowerPoint, but real, immersive training with third-party accountability. In Phase 3, the part that made executives shift uncomfortably in their chairs was transparency. A new internal reporting system would track staff behavior, escalate ignored complaints, and tie leadership bonuses to ethical performance, not just profits. Danielle knew this wouldn't make her popular. She knew some people would roll their eyes and call her too intense, but she didn't care because she had seen too much, experienced too much, to let this slide into the abyss of good intentions. This wasn't just about Carter or even about her. It was about the woman who wrote that complaint and felt like she was trespassing. It was about every quiet injustice brushed aside as not a big deal. Danielle had the power to make the system tremble, and that's exactly what she planned to do. Days later, Danielle walked into the executive conference room, holding nothing but a folder of documents and a laptop. She didn't need a speech. She was the statement. When the CEO and senior VPs sat across from her, trying to preface the conversation with vague words like unfortunate and learning moment, Danielle stopped them cold. "I didn't call this meeting for apologies," she said, her voice steady. "I called it to deliver solutions and to see who's ready to change." And then she opened the folder and laid bare the findings. She read out complaints that had been ignored. She displayed charts showing disproportionate scrutiny towards certain demographics. She highlighted leadership evaluations that rewarded performance but ignored ethics. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything else in the room. When she finished, the silence was thick enough to crack. "I don't need your promises," she said, her gaze locked on the CEO. "I need your signatures, your approval for this plan, and your commitment that we will not be the kind of company that rewards disrespect and calls it efficiency." One executive spoke up, trying to soften the blow. "Danielle, this is ambitious and fast. Cultural change takes time." "Then start now," she interrupted, "because this culture isn't neutral. It's broken. And every day we delay, someone else is made to feel like they don't belong." She left the room with signatures. Later that night, back in her hotel, Danielle looked out the window at the blinking city lights. She didn't feel victorious. She felt responsible. For everyone watching, for everyone who didn't have the power to call a boardroom to order, for those who still had to walk quietly through terminals, hoping no one would question their right to be there. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever swallowed your voice to keep the peace, let Danielle's story remind you, you are not the problem. The system is. And systems can be changed. But it starts with someone who refuses to be silenced. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment to support Danielle. Hit like to spread the message. And subscribe to hear more stories of justice, strength, and transformation. Change begins with truth and the courage to act on it. Danielle Robinson didn't pace, didn't fidget, didn't flinch. She simply stood at the head of the long glass conference table, the the city skyline towering behind her, and let the silence settle like fog. The room was full, executives in navy suits, VPs clutching tablets, department heads avoiding her gaze. But Danielle, she was calm, composed, electric. She placed a leather folder in front of her with precision. Then slowly she looked around and said, "Let's begin." No introduction, no icebreakers, just impact. Because what Danielle had witnessed at the airport, being profiled, disrespected, and dismissed by her own airline staff, wasn't just a bad moment. It was a flashing neon sign screaming that the culture of the company she now owned was broken. And today, in this boardroom, the reckoning would begin. She didn't need a PowerPoint. Her presence alone was the presentation. Her eyes locked onto each person in the room as she began. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm not here for optics. I'm here because the company I now lead made me feel like I didn't belong. Me, a black woman, a first-class ticket in hand, and still, I was treated like a trespasser." Her voice didn't waver, but the emotion was there, fury wrapped in restraint, strength edged in pain. "So no, this isn't damage control. This is a transformation, and it starts now." She opened the folder and slid out a document marked in bold. Three-phase reform plan, structural accountability and cultural integrity. Her tone sharpened as she spoke. Phase 1, immediate corrective action. Every single frontline employee who's received more than 2 customer complaints related to bias or unprofessional behavior is under review. Period. No more brushing it under the rug, no more verbal warnings. This is zero tolerance. Some executives exchanged nervous glances. A few shifted in their seats. Danielle didn't pause. Phase 2, short-term restructuring. That means leadership retraining, not those 2-hour checkbox seminars you've been running. Real, immersive, third-party-led sessions. And while we're at it, we're overhauling your complaint escalation process. No more ignored grievances. From now on, unresolved issues escalate directly to corporate with timelines and consequences attached. The air grew heavier. Phase 3, she said, her voice now calm but commanding. Long-term cultural shifts. We build new habits, new systems, new expectations, starting with a rotating employee ethics board, transparent internal audits, and, yes, anonymous reporting lines. Because change isn't just policy, it's behavior. And I plan to make sure this company's culture doesn't just evolve, it transforms. A hand went up. The CFO, a man with silver hair and a reputation for always playing devil's advocate, cleared his throat. "Danielle, it's a bold plan, ambitious, but cultural change, it takes time. People won't adapt overnight. Aren't we being a little aggressive here?" Danielle smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Aggressive?" she said quietly. Aggressive was being told, in front of a crowd, that my first-class ticket looked suspicious. Aggressive is being surrounded by security when I was simply in the right line. Aggressive is allowing that behavior to exist in your company for years without consequence. What I'm doing is called accountability. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you've been comfortable for too long. Silence. Another executive tried a different tactic. "This could be expensive, legal fees, new consultants, retraining." "Do you know what's more expensive?" Danielle interrupted. "Lawsuits, boycotts, losing trust, losing people, losing your soul while chasing spreadsheets. Let me be very clear. This airline will be known for its integrity, or it will be known for its fall. I'm giving you the chance to choose." No one spoke. And then something remarkable happened. A younger executive, not more than 30, spoke up from the back. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Miss Robinson, I just want to say thank you. My little sister just graduated college. She's brilliant, ambitious, but she's already experienced things like this, and Her voice caught. "I want her to live in a world where she doesn't have to armor up just to travel." Danielle's expression softened. For the first time that day, her voice trembled slightly with emotion. "Then let's build that world," she said. "For her. For all of us." The room changed after that. The resistance faded. The excuses fell silent. Danielle continued presenting timelines, expectations, and measurable outcomes. She assigned teams, set deadlines, and asked for input, not for permission. By the time the meeting ended, the executives had more than a plan. They had a mission. As Danielle walked out of the room, a few of them stood, not out of protocol, but out of something deeper. Respect, reverence, and maybe, just maybe, a bit of awe. She didn't stop walking. She didn't look back. Outside the conference room, her assistant was waiting. "How did it go?" she asked. Danielle took a slow breath, her eyes focused on the horizon through the massive windows. "It went exactly how it needed to," she said. "Now we build." This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about ego. It was about making sure that no one, no matter their race, gender, background, or bank account, would ever again be treated like Danielle had been. She turned to her assistant. "Call the training firm. Tell them we start onboarding tomorrow. And make sure the ethics board gets full independence. If we're going to clean house, we do it thoroughly." Her voice was clear, steady, resolute, because Danielle Robinson hadn't come to the boardroom to vent. She came to rebuild. From the ashes of arrogance and complacency, she was laying down the framework of something better, something just. And if her voice ever shook, it was not with fear, it was with power. Danielle Robinson stood at the helm of an airline she had bought, not out of a sense of privilege, but out of necessity. The decision to acquire the company wasn't made lightly. She wasn't a stranger to power, but what she had witnessed at the airport that day, the way she was treated by staff despite her first-class ticket, was the final straw. The discrimination was not new. It was a quiet, insidious norm that had festered beneath the surface of the airline's operations for far too long. And Danielle had come to a harsh realization. The problem wasn't just individual bad actors. It was embedded deep within the culture of the company itself. The policies were in place, the mission statements were clear, but the actions, the day-to-day treatment of passengers, especially people like her, told a very different story. She walked into the boardroom, her steps measured and purposeful. The room, lined with polished mahogany and glass, was filled with people who saw her as a businesswoman, a potential disruptor of the status quo. They were all waiting for her to lay down the next set of demands. They expected a smooth meeting with little more than minor course corrections. But Danielle had other plans. The room fell silent as she took her seat at the head of the table, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. She could feel the eyes of the executives, all with their own agendas, lingering on her. They were hoping for a soft approach, a strategy of appeasement that wouldn't rock the boat. But they didn't know her. "I don't want to hear your apologies," Danielle said, her voice steady and unwavering. "I don't want to hear about training programs that were never implemented properly or the vague promises of change that never materialize. I'm here because I saw firsthand how your system, your staff, your culture actively works against the very values you claim to stand for." Her words hung in the air like a declaration of war. One of the senior executives, a tall man in his late 50s, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He cleared his throat. "Danielle, we understand there have been some issues, but—" "No," Danielle cut him off, her voice calm but firm. "You don't understand. It's not about a few isolated issues. It's about a culture of complacency and silence. I was humiliated today. The staff at the check-in counter assumed I didn't belong in first class. That's not an isolated incident. It's systemic, and it's your responsibility to fix it." The room shifted. Some executives looked down, others exchanged uneasy glances. No one had expected the conversation to veer so sharply into the uncomfortable. But Danielle wasn't done. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the room, piercing through the veneer of professionalism. "I demand more than a one-off training session or a quick fix. If we're going to change this company, we need to address the root causes. We need accountability, real, tangible accountability," she said, her gaze settling on the head of human resources, a woman named Carol who had long since made a career of smoothing over complaints with little action. Carol shifted in her seat, but Danielle wasn't about to let her off the hook. "We will implement anonymous reporting systems for employees. People need a way to report discriminatory actions, harassment, and bias without fear of retaliation. And we will ensure these reports are taken seriously. You'll also ensure ongoing bias training, not as an afterthought, but as part of the daily operations. Employees should be constantly aware of the cultural competency required in this industry. This isn't a once-a-year check-off. This is embedded in how we operate, day in and day out. We're talking about real behavioral change, not just words on a page. Danielle paused, letting her words settle, her eyes scanning the room. The executives were uncomfortable. Some fidgeted with their pens, others avoided her gaze, and a few exchanged looks, as if silently debating whether they should challenge her. But no one spoke up. No one had the courage to go against her yet. And that's not all, Danielle continued. Her voice was quieter now, but there was a steel in it that made the entire room take notice. We'll also conduct a leadership audit. I want to know who's been complicit in failing to address these issues. I don't care about titles or tenure. If you've turned a blind eye, if you've swept things under the rug, you're out. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, and I won't tolerate it. Her gaze locked on several senior leaders, including Carol, who had been part of the problem for far too long. Carol's eyes flickered nervously, but Danielle remained impassive. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. Danielle let it linger, knowing that it was the discomfort that would force them to listen. She wasn't asking for their opinions. She was telling them what needed to be done. The power dynamic had shifted. Now she controlled the narrative, and no one was going to distract her from her goal. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but Danielle ignored it. She had more important matters at hand. I understand this might be uncomfortable for some of you. For the majority of you in this room, the thought of disrupting the old ways of doing things is daunting, she said, her tone shifting slightly, softening only a little. But change isn't easy. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, and it's necessary. We will ensure that every staff member knows what's expected of them. No more excuses, no more complacency. I don't want to hear that we're doing enough. I want to hear about real action. And if that action isn't taken, I'll make sure the world knows it. If I see this company slip back into olden habits, I'll tear it down and rebuild it from the ground up. No hesitation, no second thoughts. The room fell still. The executives exchanged furtive glances, their discomfort now palpable. For the first time, they realized just how serious Danielle was. This wasn't about a few bad apples. This was about tearing down an entire system that had allowed inequality, discrimination, and bias to thrive unchecked. Danielle wasn't playing by the old rules. She was rewriting them. Finally, the CEO, a tall, well-dressed man named Jonathan Marks, cleared his throat. He looked at Danielle, his face a mix of respect and apprehension. Danielle, I can see you're committed to making these changes, but it's a massive undertaking. It'll take time. Danielle met his gaze unwaveringly. Time is exactly what we've run out of. We've spent far too long waiting for change to come, waiting for things to improve, waiting for others to make the hard decisions. But now I'm here, and we're making it happen today. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. The executives shifted, some still unwilling to look her in the eye, while others sat silently, the weight of her words sinking in. Danielle knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be resistance. There would be setbacks. But she was ready. She had faced much worse in her career, and if the airline's leadership thought they could undermine her, they would quickly learn how wrong they were. Danielle turned to leave the room, her steps slow and deliberate. But as she walked out, she felt the shift. The energy in the room had changed. They had seen the power she wielded, and they had felt the urgency in her demands. Change was no longer an abstract concept to be discussed over quarterly meetings. It was a mission, one she would lead and one she would ensure was fulfilled. Danielle Robinson had arrived, and no one was going to stop her. As she walked down the hall, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The fight was far from over, but this was her beginning. She was setting the foundation for a company that would no longer just talk about inclusivity, but live it every day. And if anyone stood in her way, they would be swept away, just as they should have been long ago. She reached for her phone, now buzzing with notifications. As she read through them, her heart swelled with determination. This wasn't just about an airline. This was about justice. This was about change, and she was going to lead it. Danielle Robinson settled into her first-class seat, the hum of the engines a familiar lull as the plane prepared for takeoff. The evening flight was quiet, almost tranquil, and yet Danielle couldn't shake the unease that had been following her since her experience earlier in the day at the airport. She had witnessed firsthand the deep-seated biases that still permeated the airline, And as the wheels of the plane slowly began to roll, she found herself reflecting on the events that had led her here. Earlier that day, the incident at the priority check-in counter had been the tipping point, an embarrassing, humiliating moment that she had never expected to face. As the staff at the airport had questioned her legitimacy and treated her with suspicion, Danielle had kept her composure, standing tall and unyielding, refusing to let their judgment define her. The very idea that someone would challenge her right to be there, at a counter she had paid for, in a seat she had earned, was absurd. Yet it had happened. The security guard's reluctant approach, the condescending tone of the staff, the growing whispers from passengers in line, all of it had been a reminder of how deeply ingrained biases still were, not just in the airline, but in the system at large. And that was when it hit her. This was not a matter of a few bad apples. No, it was far more systemic than that. The discrimination, subtle and overt, was woven into the fabric of the company. The airline's policies were clear, but the culture allowed bias to flourish unchecked, allowing moments of entitlement, of judgment, and of systemic neglect to slip through the cracks, unchallenged and unquestioned. She had made the decision that day, the moment she stepped off the plane after her confrontation in the check-in line, that she would take matters into her own hands. She would not be just another person voicing concerns, hoping for change. She would be the force that demanded it. Now, as she sat on this high-profile transcontinental flight, Danielle observed everything with a sharp, almost clinical detachment, her mind still buzzing with thoughts of the meeting she had just attended. She had carefully outlined a vision for systemic change, demanding that real reforms take place at every level, from frontline staff training to leadership accountability. But today, as she was surrounded by the luxury of the flight and the whispers of passengers around her, she couldn't help but notice the moments, the little things that spoke volumes about the work that still needed to be done. Across the aisle from her, a middle-aged man in a perfectly tailored suit snapped his fingers impatiently at a flight attendant. She was polite, of course, smiling and responding quickly, but there was something in her eyes, a flash of hesitation, as if she knew she was about to become part of a performance. Danielle watched as the attendant hastened over to the man, her movements just a little too eager, a little too practiced. The man's tone, sharp and dismissive, was unmistakable. He was making demands without the slightest bit of courtesy, as though the flight attendant's sole purpose was to serve him, an unquestioned right, simply because of his status, his position. Danielle couldn't help but notice the way the flight attendant's smile faltered, just for a moment, as she placed the drink in front of him. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but to Danielle it spoke volumes. This wasn't the first time she had seen such behavior. It wasn't the first time she had witnessed someone with a sense of entitlement demanding service. And it certainly wasn't the first time she had seen a worker hesitate, knowing that speaking up, challenging this behavior, would not be welcomed, would not be tolerated. As she reflected on these moments, Danielle's mind drifted back to the airport, back to the man behind the counter, the one who had humiliated her. She had remained calm in the face of his disrespect, refusing to let him rattle her. But she couldn't forget how she had felt, how her body had tensed in that moment, how her pulse had quickened as the weight of his assumptions pressed in on her. The subtle way his gaze had lingered a second too long, the way he'd looked at her as if she were out of place, as if her existence in that space was an anomaly. His arrogance had been unspoken but clear, an arrogance that many shared in that airport, in that airline, and beyond. But Danielle wasn't one to back down. She knew that what she had witnessed in the airport was just the tip of the iceberg, and she would not let it slide. She could feel the weight of that decision in her bones, could feel it stirring in her chest as the flight attendants continued their rounds, offering drinks and small pleasantries to the passengers. The indifference, the unspoken biases, those would have to be confronted head-on. Her thoughts were interrupted as she glanced toward the back of the plane. A young black woman, probably in her late 20s, was engaged in a conversation with a flight attendant. Danielle couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see the body language. The young woman's posture, confident yet careful, trying to remain composed as she spoke. The flight attendant's response was sharp, defensive, and dismissive. The woman's brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't give in. Instead, she stood her ground, her voice measured, refusing to let herself be intimidated. Danielle's heart went out to her. She knew that feeling all too well, the weight of being scrutinized, the emotional toll of being made to feel out of place, even when you had every right to be there. She admired the young woman's strength, her refusal to shrink, to give up her voice just to avoid conflict. Danielle had learned long ago that silence in these moments would only allow the status quo to thrive. She watched as the interaction unfolded, noting how the flight attendant seemed to soften as another crew member arrived, her presence bringing a slight relief to the situation. The tension ebbed, but Danielle could see that the incident wasn't over. The young woman's discomfort was still visible, even if it was hidden behind a thin mask of politeness. She knew that it wasn't just about this one interaction. It was about the larger, more insidious culture of bias and entitlement that had been allowed to flourish within the system. It was about how these moments were normalized, allowed to become part of the fabric of everyday life, dismissed and overlooked. And in that moment, as she sat there watching the young woman and the flight attendants, Danielle understood just how deeply the work of reform needed to go. It wasn't just about policies. It wasn't just about training. It was about the culture, the mindset that allowed this behavior to persist. This was what she was up against. This was what needed to be changed. Danielle leaned back in her seat, her gaze fixed out the window as the plane soared into the clouds. The world below was vast, an endless sea of possibility and opportunity, but she knew that change wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't come overnight. But as long as she had a voice, as long as she had the power to make a difference, she would continue to fight. And in that moment, as she watched the landscape below, she made a silent vow. She would not let the world keep turning a blind eye to the injustices, no matter how small or how hidden. Change wasn't just a lofty goal, it was something she would make a reality. For herself, for that young woman, and for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible, unworthy, or out of place. This was her fight, and she would see it through. Danielle Robinson had always believed in the power of one voice. But in the wake of the injustice she had faced that morning, she began to see how much more could be accomplished when that voice wasn't just used to stand up for oneself, but to create a ripple effect that inspired others to do the same. The moment she had spoken up at the check-in counter, something shifted. Not just in the airport, but in herself. It wasn't just about holding the staff accountable or asserting her rights. It was about setting an example. She realized that her quiet strength wasn't just for her own survival. It was a tool for others who had felt powerless in the face of similar discrimination. As Danielle made her way toward the airport lounge after the confrontation, she couldn't shake the feeling that the events of the day had left more than just a mark on her. The interactions at the check-in counter had rippled outward, catching the attention of those around her. A woman standing in line had locked eyes with her, and Danielle had seen it, a look of shared understanding, a glimmer of recognition. It wasn't a new experience for Danielle. She had been that woman before, the one silently witnessing the injustice but too hesitant to act. This time, though, Danielle had taken a stand, and in doing so, she had unknowingly planted a seed for others to follow. As she waited in the lounge, Danielle observed the passengers around her. A few moments later, her eyes caught a glimpse of the young black woman who had been seated a few rows behind her during the flight. Danielle hadn't heard their conversation, but she had noticed the subtle discomfort in the way the attendant had responded to the woman's polite but firm objections. There it was again, a moment of inequality, one that might have passed unnoticed if Danielle hadn't been tuned into the cues, the microaggressions that lingered in the air. This young woman had been made to feel small, dismissed in a way that many would ignore or forget. But Danielle saw it, and she knew without a doubt that it wasn't just about this one woman's dignity. It was about all of the unsung voices who had suffered in silence, unnoticed, beneath the weight of prejudice. Danielle's gaze lingered on her, and for a brief moment, the young woman caught her eye. She seemed to hesitate, as though unsure whether to approach. There was a slight tilt to her chin, a flicker of recognition, and then slowly she began walking toward Danielle. The weight of what had happened in the airport hung in the air, but in this moment, there was a quiet understanding that passed between them. Danielle didn't need to say a word. She simply offered a smile, warm but knowing, one that conveyed all the strength she had been gathering for years. The young woman smiled back, a little uncertain, but there was something in her eyes that spoke volumes. a mixture of relief, recognition, and gratitude. "You don't have to let them make you feel invisible," Danielle said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but it was enough. The young woman nodded, her expression shifting from uncertainty to a quiet determination. Danielle had seen that change before. She had felt it in herself long ago when she first started standing up for herself. It was the same quiet strength, the same fire that began to burn just beneath the surface. The same decision to no longer let the world define your worth for you. As the woman walked away, her shoulders straighter, her steps more confident, Danielle felt a swell of pride in her chest. This was what it was all about. Not just demanding respect for herself, but encouraging others to rise, to speak out, to know their worth. She had never set out to be a leader, but now as the young woman's image lingered in her mind, she realized that perhaps that was exactly what she had become. A leader not through loud speeches or grand gestures, but through quiet example, through moments like this when she showed others that they too had the power to claim their space, their dignity, and their voice. Danielle wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. The ripple effect had only just begun. The young woman's new confidence was only the first of many. Danielle could feel the shift in the air, the quiet stirring of a movement that was beginning to take shape. It wasn't just about one isolated incident or one brave individual standing up against discrimination. It was about creating a culture where everyone had the right to speak up, to demand better, and to know that they were worth more than the biases and assumptions that people tried to impose upon them. As the flight took off, Danielle leaned back into her seat, her mind working quickly through her plans. She would continue to fight, not just for herself, but for the others who needed her leadership, even if they didn't know it yet. In her mind, she could already see the ripple extending outward. There would be more like the young woman in the airport, and Danielle would be there for them. She would continue to show up, to speak up, and to create a new standard of dignity and empowerment. When the plane finally landed, Danielle's resolve was even stronger. She had already started to reach out to her network, preparing to take action. She knew that the corporate world had a long way to go when it came to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But she also knew that change began with individuals. She had set the example. Now it was time to move beyond the moments of injustice and create a real, lasting movement that would ripple through industries, communities, and society at large. The quiet strength that had once been her shield now became her sword, carving out new pathways of possibility for those who would come after her. She was no longer just a passenger on this journey. She was the driver of change. And as the days passed, Danielle continued to lift others up, showing them that they too could create ripples of their own. One by one, each moment of empowerment would combine into something unstoppable, a movement of strength, resilience, and dignity that would leave an indelible mark on the world. And it all started with Danielle Robinson deciding that she was worthy of respect, that her voice mattered, and that standing up for herself was the first step in showing others how to do the same. What began as a personal act of resistance in an airport terminal soon became a powerful catalyst for systemic change. Danielle Robinson had always been a woman of quiet strength, one who carried herself with grace and dignity, no matter the circumstances. But when an airline employee dared to question her right to be in the priority check-in line, her patience and resolve were tested in a way she had never experienced before. In that moment, Danielle realized that this wasn't just about her, it was about every person who had ever been dismissed, marginalized, or made to feel less than they were. What started as a personal humiliation became the spark of something much larger, something far beyond her own journey. At the airport, the humiliation Danielle faced was subtle at first, just a flicker of judgment in the eyes of the airline employee, a questioning glance that turned into a series of dismissive actions. But as the moments ticked by, Danielle's anger grew, not just from the unfairness of the situation, but from the realization that this wasn't an isolated event. She wasn't the first, and unfortunately, she wouldn't be the last. She knew that she could walk away, let it slide, and let it be just another unfortunate incident in a long list of microaggressions and systemic biases. But something inside her, a quiet yet unshakable resolve, told her that this time it had to be different. She wouldn't let the quiet cruelty of that moment go unchallenged. And in doing so, Danielle unwittingly became a beacon for others who had felt powerless. By the time she left that airport, Danielle had made a decision that would change not only her life, but the course of the airline's future. She had already made the call, using her influence to set in motion a transformation that would forever alter the way this airline, and others like it, treated their passengers and employees. The power of her voice, combined with the authority of her position, was enough to turn the tide. No longer just a passenger, Danielle had become the catalyst for change, forcing an organization to look itself in the mirror and reckon with its failures. What followed was a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and strategy. Danielle didn't just demand change. She meticulously engineered it. She wasn't after an apology or a single act of retribution. She wanted a comprehensive transformation. Her power wasn't in seeking revenge. It was in the quiet yet relentless drive to make the airline a model of accountability and inclusivity. By bringing attention to the issues she had faced, Danielle reshaped not only the company's practices, but their very understanding of what it meant to serve customers with respect and dignity. She transformed an incident that could have been swept under the rug into an opportunity to address the underlying issues that perpetuated systemic discrimination. As she worked with the airline's executives, Danielle made it clear that this wasn't just a matter of firing a few bad apples. It was about changing the corporate culture from the inside out. She implemented new training protocols for all employees, designed to address bias, microaggressions, and most importantly, to foster a culture of respect. It wasn't enough to tell people what to do. She needed to change how they thought. And in doing so, Danielle not only changed the airline's policies, but also redefined what leadership looked like. Through her leadership, Danielle proved that real influence lies in using your power to create justice. She led with grace, intelligence, and unshakable strength, showing the world that you don't have to raise your voice in anger to be heard. Sometimes the most effective leadership is quiet, steady, and purposeful, creating a ripple effect that reverberates far beyond one individual's experience. What began as a single incident of discrimination became the spark for a sweeping change, not just within the airline, but in the broader industry. Danielle proved that systemic injustice doesn't need to be met with chaos or destruction. It can be dismantled with thoughtful, deliberate action. Months later, the changes Danielle had spearheaded began to take shape. The airline's reputation had shifted dramatically, now seen as a leader in inclusivity and customer care. Staff were trained to recognize their biases, and leaders across the company were held accountable for the culture they fostered. Danielle's work was a clear example that change is possible, even in the most entrenched systems, but it requires a steady hand, a willingness to do the hard work, and a refusal to accept the status quo. Danielle's legacy now stands as a testament to the power of resistance, not as an act of defiance, but as a force for transformation. She has become a symbol of what it means to turn adversity into opportunity and how one person's courage can reshape an entire system. Her story isn't just about standing up for herself. It's about taking the lessons learned from personal hardship and using them to inspire and lead others toward a more just and equitable future. Danielle's journey teaches us all that standing up against injustice requires more than just an emotional response. It demands strategy, leadership, and above all, patience. True transformation is never instantaneous, and the process can be grueling. But as Danielle's story illustrates, lasting change is possible when we refuse to let the status quo go unchallenged. As you reflect on Danielle's journey, consider how you can make a difference in your own life. When faced with injustice, it's easy to feel small or insignificant. But just like Danielle, you have the power to create change. You don't need to have an army behind you, and you don't need to be loud to be heard. All you need is the courage to act and the wisdom to know that your actions can inspire others to do the same. If you've been inspired by Danielle's story, don't forget to like and comment below. Let us know how her story has impacted you and what steps you're planning to take in your own life to fight injustice. And for more incredible stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us share stories of resilience, strength, and transformation with even more people. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to bringing you more inspiring stories in the future.